Hello and welcome. This is Lusterquin. A little while back, I had a theory, and the theory was that if Sytrus could create complex pads, arpeggios, and even full sequences, then theoretically, you would also be able to create an entire song inside a single instance of the plugin. In December of 2017, I finally put this theory to the test. And indeed, I found that you could actually create a full song inside Sytrus using its 6 operators, 3 filters, and effects section. It is the articulation editor inside of each of these that is the MVP. So what we're going to do is I released this in December 2017, so it's been a little while now, but I wanted to make a video really going over it. So I'm going to play the 2-minute patch for you, and then we're going to go talk about it a little bit. Alright, so that's the full song, and it could actually be longer, and we're going to talk about why in a bit. And you'll notice that the CPU is going a little crazy too. There's definitely a lot of voices in this track, or patch, or whatever you want to call it, I guess. So I created this notebook here to help you kind of follow along, because I'm really going to follow the sort of structure of this, because I want to be able to make sure that you can absorb the most of this patch in the shortest amount of time, and that's kind of the goal of this. Okay, so we're going to break this down. So Sytrus, for those of you who are maybe new to the plugin, Sytrus comes with 6 operators. Now the reason they're called operators and not oscillators is because they can do a lot more than just create sound. They contain oscillators, but they can also modulate other operators as well. And they come with this full articulation section too. And by the way, a lot of this verbiage, it comes directly from the manual. So you just hover over here and you press F1 and you can learn about anything inside here. So it comes with 6 of those. The modulation matrix is how you can modulate the other operators. This is where it performs FM synthesis. There's also some ring modulation synthesis going on in here. And then we've got the 3 filter units here, which are being used by different sounds. So operators 1 and 2, these are the principal synths that you hear. So the first module, this is the very first synth that you hear in the beginning. And what you'll notice is that we start, and if I mute, I'm going to go ahead and mute all of these other ones here so that you can just hear this first synth. So this is the first synth you hear, and you can hear that volume knob is why it acts like a pluck here. Okay, and then under pitch, this is where we give it the notes. Here you can see. And then we just loop it. Now I'm not sure how many bars this is. It looks like it might be, it's more than 16. It might be 24? 24 bars, I think? Something like that. But we loop it over and over and over again. And we loop it several times in this song. And so what we have working together here is a volume knob to help control how much of a pluck sound that it is. So here we have it at 100%, and then we have these curves that let us determine, like here it's a really quick, like blip sound, but if we bring it up here, it's just got a little fallout at the end there. And so we can change how much of a pluck it is there, and the timing of that here. Notice also that in all these envelopes I have both tempo and global selected, so it will match the tempo of the project file as well, which is really an important feature. So volume and pitch, those are the two principal envelopes. I'm not going to go through every single one of these envelopes because it doesn't really make sense. You can download the file and dissect them piece by piece if you wish. The tricky thing here is that you can't, like in FL Studio, you can't just kind of select and start playing from the middle of the song. And that's why it took so long to make, is because you can't just start playing it in the center. You have to play it all the way through. So you can imagine it was kind of a pain in the ass to build this. And so that's why I'm not going to spend too much time going over those minute details, but I want to show you how really just the composition of it. So we use those, and by the way, throughout here you can see if we pan back and forth on operators 1 and 2, there are some minute differences. This is how we create chords in this song. So if I enable 2 now, you're going to notice here in the beginning how so in this volume knob here, there's going to be 2 synths playing on top of each other, and both of them are like variations of sine wave, but they simply have, so like operator 2 has no harmonics added to it. Operator 1, I've added some harmonics in here. So those are really the main differences. And then you can see here the frequency ratio is about half of what it is in operator 1. So I'm just going to play this first section so you can hear both of those. Now you may be wondering what that distortion is coming from. Well, I mentioned earlier that there is some modulation taking place in this track. And indeed, what you're hearing is actually a complex variation of things. So if we take a look at this filter, we have the wave shaper on. If we turn this off, you'll notice it lessens the effect a little bit. Okay? So what's actually happening here as we listen to this, a few things. First, we have the volume of the reverb increased and decreased at different intervals throughout the track. You'll notice in some sections that you hear the reverb more than in others. That is a result of this mapping here, where we increase or decrease the volume of that particular effect. Additionally, take a look at the modulation that is taking place. This complex bouncing of distortions that you hear is a result of operator 3 modulating operators 1 and 2. The way that this works is that modulation 3 adds, in a magic way, this waveform, and it adds it to the inputs of these two waveforms. Operator 3 is the base operator, as you can see here. It is a pre-filtered triangle wave, and it has a few customized harmonics on it. It is not very complex, but what it does is it induces some dubstep-like effects that we hear throughout the track. And we're going to hear those in a minute, because I'm going to go ahead and enable operator 4 as well. Okay, and so what we see here also is that operators 1 and 2 are also modulating operator 3. So there is an interesting relationship of modulations that occurs here. So I'm going to go ahead and enable now operator 3, because operator 3 is being routed to filter 3. I'm going to enable the bass. Hear that dubstep effect, those kind of modulated accentuations at the start of each bar? That is a result of the modulation envelopes. Notice here, at the second bar, that beginning of that second bar, we introduce the modulation volume, we peak it, and then we bring it down to 0. So every time the bass starts at that bar, it starts with that crunching, modulated effect, wobble, and then it goes down to 0. And we loop that throughout the entire duration of this loop. That's that effect you're hearing. That's how it's created. I'm going to demonstrate this as well by muting or turning off this volume. Oh, I just killed it there. Listen now. The modulations are no more. So that is a brief description of how that relationship works. And if we look here, and I did kind of F it up at the end there, I had forgotten that if you modify any envelopes in here, it actually resets that sound. So another reason that made it so difficult to do this. But basically, we have the same modulation envelopes going on in this piece. So even in operator 1, we do the same thing. We have like a spike here at the beginning of each of the individual bars, so that modulation is only present to give an accentuation right at the beginning there. And we only introduce like a little bit. If you take a look up here, we only add a little bit here. We do add a lot of modulation here when we're modulating operator 2 to 3. So basically, if you don't know how this works, the row is the operator, and then this tells you, each row tells you what operators are operating, for example, operator 1. So like this knob here is operator 3, 2, 1. So operator 3 is modulating operator 1 at that level. Now you can't automate these. That's why we use the envelopes, because the modulation envelopes and the volume here, they're the same thing as this in here. And so that's what we do with that. Now I'm going to start playing the song again, and we're going to talk about sound number 4 as well. So there's a couple points in here. If you want to play around with this a little bit, you can do that. I talk about unison and how unison contributes to the thickness of this sound. There are actually unison mappings for just about every little parameter in here, and that's partly why the CPU is a little crazy. Basically, what unison mappings do is they give you more creative control over how and to what degree the unison is applied to that individual target. So, for example, the modulation target, we have it going from 0 to 100 here, and so that's our mapping for that. And then for pitch, it's pretty much non-existent. Panning, we do something like that. I didn't really know much of what I was doing when I did this. I just played with different shapes, and I got some cool results. But this tells you how to really, these points in here, some of these points like this, we talk about how you can play with the different sounds and get to know what each individual knob does, because you can change these parameters however you wish, and you'll get a completely different sound. That's kind of the idea here. So let's talk about operator 4 now. Operator 4 is both an effect riser and a complementary synth. The difference between the two is defined by the volume envelope, and this mimics sidechain. And I'm just talking verbatim from the notebook here. So it mimics sidechain by doing the opposite of what the other volume envelopes and the other operators did. Instead of starting at 100, it starts at 0, and it fades up. It fades into 100. And so we create this effect of it being a sidechain while the kick drum, which is operator 6, while this plays. So let's play operator 4 now, and we're going to bring that in, and operator 4 is being routed also to filter number 1. And we have another output here. So you can hear it there in the beginning. It's that reverse effect. That bit crusher effect, again, happens by the modulation coming from operator 3. Now we also introduced ring modulation here. Now, what ring modulation does is it multiplies the two inputs here. It multiplies the effects. And so we add a little bit of ring modulation in here, and we get a qualitatively different sound than if we were to decrease it. So if I take these off, it's a little bit hard to know now. We'll have to wait for the sound to come back in, but you'll know the difference. You'll be able to hear it. In fact, if I mute, this is just operator 4 now. Notice how when I introduce the ring modulation, there's a more prominent bit crushing going on there. Now we have that rising effect again. This is much sharper, but the ring modulation adds a little bit more crushing to it. That's what it does here there. So if I enable these again, so we add that noise to give a little more character to the sound. Okay, now let's talk about operator 5. Operator 5 is really interesting in a couple different ways. Operator 5 is what I call here the glue of the song. It is the full percussive ensemble of this entire patch. There are some complex articulations here that I do want to take a quick minute to look over. In fact, we're going to mute everything else in this so that you can just listen to that. Operator 5 has its own filter section and everything. So Operator 5 is created, the difference is, it's basically a noise filter. It's just a noise wave, see? We created it by removing this first harmonic. See, it would just be a sine, but we remove that first harmonic, and we're given nothing. It's just noise. So what we do is we create a complex articulation of volume. This gives it the effect of hi-hats. But then we send it to filter 2, which has some really interesting filter effects too. I'm going to play this so you can follow it. And we'll have to wait a bit because it takes a while for it to come in here, and you can hear that buildup. That white noise. So you can hear the filtering effects it's doing right now. But there's some complex articulations here. Now this isn't actually looped until we get somewhere else in here, right here. The looping doesn't start until here. Okay, now I'm not sure where that is out in here, but basically everything in here had to be created manually, which you can imagine, yeah, definitely took a little bit of time there because you can't just copy paste sections in here. You've got to do all of that individually. Okay, but that's how that's created. And so we have this kind of marriage between the volume envelope and then the filtering cutoff envelope here. We also introduced some accentuations by bringing in the low band because we have a band pass filter. So we got low band happening, high band changes here as well. And then of course we have the wave shaper to bring that noise level up quite a bit. Okay, so there's a lot happening with this sound, and again, also routed to the effects, so it shares the same reverb behavior that the rest of the sounds in here sound. Okay? So, yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. Finally, we have the kick drum, which is very simple. We literally just have this. The kick drum is created by basically taking a sine wave and I distort it to where it's almost a square, but it's really not. It's just really distorted, like sine wave here. And then I take the pitch and it goes from 100 to 0 super quickly, and that creates this really rapid sort of slide. And I also have the frequency ratio set to 0, and I brought up the hertz a little bit here, so it moves very quickly. And we can mess around with this too if you want to like change it a little bit. But like I was pretty fine with it. The sound itself can change depending on like how much of a curve you have here, because the sharper, the more curve you have, the more tension that's on this curve, the sharper that kick is going to be. And so you can even hear, if you listen, there's no release. That's a very tight, very quick moving kick. Okay, and then concurrently, it's not just volume, it's also, of course, the pitch. The speed at which that pitch goes from 100 to 0. Yeah, so the kick is pretty simple. And again, everything except the kick is filtered through these individual filters here. So I do want to go over now. If we take a look at the main, I have some information down here. Unison mapping is the principal part. We talked about that a little bit. Modulation X controls the volume of the kick, the cutoff amount, and the wave shape or power. So if we play the song, we're going to move sort of back and forth of modulator X, which is going to control sort of how big the sound is. And then modulator Y controls the modulation depth on operators 1 through 3 alongside the amplitude of the effects. And this modulation depth is what we were looking at a little bit earlier. And so we are going to, what I'm going to do is play the song, and we're going to listen in real time what those changes sound like. So right now it's at 0. Notice that when Y is at 0, there's no modulation almost. That dubstep sound in the bass is gone. See, if I turn it to 100, now you hear it. Now you can really hear that effect and how that modulation works in this patch. It turns that into this. So much character that modulation adds, and that you use modulation Y to really feel those differences. Now, modulation X controls the size of the sound. Really big sound. And that is it. A lot of other minute details, but that's why I encourage you to download the patch to see for yourself exactly how it works. Whether you are a new user to Sytrus or you are a seasoned user of the plugin who loves it just as much as I do, I think there is something interesting that you will find in this patch, if nothing more than a creative experiment. And I would encourage you to take a look around. The goal of this patch was really to showcase how powerful Sytrus is and exactly what it can do. I think that we've accomplished that goal here today. So, with that, welcome to the Sytrus, and I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough. I'll see you guys in another video.